Do you think clowns are simply carnival entertainers with painted smiles and colorful costumes? Harmless performers, meant to delight children with balloon animals and slapstick comedy? What if I told you that beneath the grease paint and behind the red noses lies a history so disturbing that governments across the world have actively suppressed it for over a century? The information I'm about to share has been systematically erased from public records. Archives have been purged, witnesses silenced, evidence destroyed, but fragments remain, scattered across decades and continents, waiting for someone to finally assemble the horrifying truth. It begins not with entertainment, but with ancient ritual. Anthropologists have long recognized that clown-like figures exist in virtually every human culture throughout history. From Native American sacred clowns to medieval European jesters to Japanese Hayotoko mask performers. The conventional explanation is simple convergent cultural evolution. Societies independently developing similar archetypes, innocent, universal, natural. The truth is much darker. In 1887, British anthropologist James Fraser was conducting research for his seminal work, The Golden Bough, when he discovered something disturbing in the ceremonial practices of disparate cultures. Ritualistic figures with painted faces and distorted features weren't merely entertainment, but served as intermediaries between worlds. These beings exist at thresholds, Fraser wrote in his private journal, found decades after his death. They are neither fully human nor fully other. They occupy liminal spaces between our world and what lies beyond. This journal, containing observations excluded from his published work, vanished from Cambridge University archives in 1923. It resurfaced briefly in 1967 before disappearing again. The three researchers who accessed it during this period all died under unusual circumstances within months of each other. Official causes: heart failure, drowning, suicide. No autopsies were performed. In 1891, a series of disappearances plagued small towns along the Mississippi River where traveling carnivals had recently performed. Newspaper accounts described children vanishing without trace, last seen watching clown performances. Authorities blamed river accidents and runaways, case closed. But internal police communications, declassified a century later, tell a different story. Investigating officers found strange residue at locations where children were last seen, a sticky phosphorescent substance that seemed to evaporate when exposed to sunlight. Lab analyses were inconclusive, describing the material as organic in nature but of indeterminate origin. More disturbing were the footprints found near these residues, elongated, asymmetrical impressions that matched no known shoe type, with toe patterns that seemed to suggest 6 or 7 digits. These files were sealed by federal authorities in 1892. The official reason: prevention of public panic and preservation of interstate commerce. The investigators were reassigned. The case remains officially unsolved. In 1904, during the St. Louis World's Fair, something happened that nearly exposed the truth. A performer named Joseph Grimaldi, a stage name borrowed from the famous 19th century clown, collapsed during his act. Witnesses described a convulsive seizure followed by rapid physical transformation. His body elongated, his fingers extended, his jaw dislocated to expose rows of needle-like teeth. 5 spectators were injured in the ensuing panic. The official explanation was mass hysteria triggered by heat stroke and alcohol. But Dr. William Morrison, the physician who examined Grimaldi's body, documented findings that contradicted this narrative. The skeletal structure displays evidence of rapid reconfiguration impossible in human physiology, he wrote. The cranial capacity exceeds normal parameters by 22%. The dermal layer contains pigmentation that cannot be removed and appears to be cellular rather than applied externally. Dr. Morrison's report was confiscated by government officials who identified themselves as health department representatives. Morrison himself was committed to a psychiatric institution 3 weeks later, diagnosed with delusional parasitosis. He died there in 1906 of what records describe as self-inflicted wounds. Witnesses reported he had been attempting to remove something moving beneath his skin. Between 1904 and 1912, circus fires became epidemic across America and Europe. Historical records attribute these to the flammable materials used in tent construction, a reasonable explanation. But insurance investigations from the period, accessed through Freedom of Information requests, reveal something more disturbing. In each case, the fires originated not from accidental sources, but from within the clown quarters. And in each case, no clown remains were ever recovered, despite many being reportedly trapped inside. One insurance investigator, Thomas Blackwell, noted in his 1910 report, "It appears that these fires serve not as accidents, but as incinerations, deliberately triggered when certain performers need to eliminate evidence of their true nature." The question remains, if these beings are destroyed in the flames, why do near-identical performers with the same peculiar mannerisms and performance techniques appear in new shows within weeks of each disaster? Blackwell's subsequent reports grow increasingly paranoid before abruptly ending. County records indicate he relocated to Alaska in 1911, though no further documentation of his existence can be found after this date. The period between the World Wars saw the rise of clowning as a formalized entertainment profession. In 1923, the International Clown Association was established, publicly dedicated to preserving and promoting the ancient art of clowning. Their private charter, obtained through a former member who wished to remain anonymous, contained more troubling language. To monitor and maintain appropriate containment of ancestral energies through ritual performance parameters. This charter referenced a mysterious Directive 7 that established specific rules. Clown makeup must include particular geometric patterns, performances must incorporate specific movements at regular intervals, and most strangely, each performer must maintain a unique facial design that cannot be duplicated or photographed accurately. In 1931, a researcher named Eleanor Vance began investigating what she called the clown contagion, the psychological phenomenon where exposure to clown performances seemed to trigger behavioral changes in susceptible individuals, particularly children. Her work documented cases of children who, after attending circus performances, exhibited unusual behaviors, speaking in rhythmic patterns, drawing the same distinctive symbols repeatedly, and reporting dreams of smiling people who weren't people at all. Vance's research caught the attention of federal authorities. Her home was raided in November 1932 by men claiming to represent the Public Health Service. Her research was confiscated. Vance herself disappeared, though a death certificate was issued citing tuberculosis as the cause. No body was ever produced for her family. The most disturbing incident of this period occurred in Hartford, Connecticut in July 1944. A circus performance ended in tragedy when a fire killed over 160 spectators. The official investigation blamed a carelessly discarded cigarette, but sealed witness testimonies, declassified in 2004, described something different. Multiple witnesses reported that moments before the fire began, the clowns performing in the center ring began moving in perfect synchronization, forming precise geometric patterns. Their movements became increasingly frenetic, until they formed a circle, arms outstretched. It was at this exact moment that flames erupted simultaneously at multiple points around the tent perimeter. Most disturbing was the testimony of Emma Layton, a 9-year-old girl who survived by hiding beneath a seat. "The clowns didn't run away when the fire started," her statement reads. "They stood watching, and their faces changed. Their smiles got wider than any person's could, and their eyes turned black all over. They only moved when the ceiling started falling in, but they didn't run out the exits. They walked straight into the flames, and they didn't scream or burn. They just disappeared." Emma Layton's testimony was struck from the official record. Her family relocated to Oregon the following month. When journalists attempted to interview her for a 25th anniversary retrospective on the fire, they discovered she had been institutionalized in 1947 after attempting to remove her own eyes, claiming they were how the smiling ones could see inside her head. The post-war period saw the strategic commercialization of clown imagery. Corporations adopted clown mascots for restaurants and products. Children's television programs featured clown hosts. This mass exposure served a specific purpose: normalization. By making clown imagery ubiquitous, any inherent unease was systematically desensitized in the population. The strategy was outlined in a classified 1952 psychological warfare document titled Operation Fool's Mask that described cultural inoculation against recognition of non-human infiltration through controlled exposure protocols. But the containment strategy wasn't entirely successful. Throughout the 1960s, reports emerged of rogue clowns, entities that didn't follow the established protocols of commercial performers. These incidents typically involved sightings of clown-like figures in unexpected locations, standing motionless at the edges of forests, watching children's playgrounds from storm drains, or appearing in the backgrounds of family photographs with no explanation for their presence. The most infamous case occurred in Pasadena, California in 1962, when multiple witnesses reported a tall, emaciated clown figure walking between houses in a suburban neighborhood at night. Police reports described the entity as over 7 feet tall, with impossibly long limbs and a face that seemed to change when viewed directly. The figure was reportedly accompanied by a distinctive odor described variously as cotton candy mixed with rot and sweet meat left in the sun. After 3 nights of sightings, 5 children disappeared from the neighborhood. An intensive search found nothing except crude circular symbols drawn in a phosphorescent substance on the bedroom windows of each missing child. The official investigation concluded that the children had been abducted by a human predator using a clown disguise, though no suspect was ever identified and no bodies were ever recovered. The Pasadena case files were sealed by executive order in 1963, citing national security implications. The FBI agents who led the investigation were reassigned to different departments across the country, effectively dispersing all personnel with direct knowledge of the evidence. In 1970, cultural anthropologist Margaret Williams began noticing a pattern in missing persons cases across North America. Her research identified a 38-year cycle of disappearances clustering around locations where Carnival entertainments had recently performed. Williams compiled her findings in a monograph titled The Harvest Cycle: Patterns of Disappearance in Relation to Ritual Performance. She submitted this work to the Journal of Anthropological Research in October 1971. 3 days after submission, Williams's home was destroyed in a fire that local authorities attributed to faulty wiring. Williams herself was reportedly killed, though her remains were never positively identified. The journal editors denied ever receiving her manuscript. Williams's research notes, computer files, and correspondence vanished. The only surviving fragment of her work was a single page mailed to a colleague days before her death. It contained a hand-drawn map of the United States with dozens of locations marked in red, alongside a cryptic note: "They require human tissue for molecular stabilization." The painted faces are not disguises, but metamorphic stabilizers. Without them, their true forms emerge. The 1980s saw the beginning of widespread coulrophobia, the clinical fear of clowns in the general population. Psychological literature attributes this to cultural factors, particularly the popularity of horror fiction featuring clown antagonists. But declassified CIA documents from 1983 suggest something more deliberate. Project Jester has successfully implemented Phase 1 cultural aversion programming, subject identification becoming increasingly difficult as instinctive avoidance behaviors become normalized in target populations. This period also saw the emergence of the phantom clown phenomenon, waves of sightings of threatening clown figures attempting to lure children into vehicles or wooded areas. Law enforcement typically dismissed these as urban legends or mass hysteria. But internal FBI memos from 1985 reference a classified task force codenamed Operation Big Top, dedicated to tracking what they termed Class C entities across state lines. The memo states, "These entities have demonstrated increasing difficulty maintaining stable human morphology. Containment protocols established in 1952 are showing signs of failure. Recommend immediate implementation of media suppression strategies and deployment of specialized containment teams to affected areas." In October 1988, something unprecedented happened in Westchester County, New York. During a children's birthday party, a hired clown performer named Sonny suffered what witnesses initially described as a seizure. What followed defies conventional explanation. According to sealed testimony from 7 adults present, the performer's body began to contort and elongate. The colorful costume split at the seams, revealing not human skin but a glistening, chitinous surface beneath. Most horrifying were the appendages that emerged from the tears, thin, jointed limbs numbering far more than 4. Before the adults could react, the entity seized 2 children and escaped through a sliding glass door. Police arrived within minutes, but found no trace of the creature, the clown costume, or the missing children. A 3-week search yielded nothing except strange residue on the ground behind the house, a sticky, phosphorescent substance that evaporated when collected for analysis. The official report attributed the incident to hallucination caused by carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty furnace. The missing children were classified as kidnapping victims taken by a human predator. The case remains unsolved. The families of both children were relocated through a federal program typically reserved for witnesses in high-level criminal cases. Their current whereabouts are unknown. In 1990, Dr. James Halloran, a neurologist at Johns Hopkins University, made a discovery that nearly revealed the truth. While studying brain activity in patients with seizure disorders, he identified unusual patterns in subjects who had experienced prolonged exposure to clown performances in childhood. These patients showed abnormal activity in the pineal gland and amygdala when shown images of clown faces. More concerning was the discovery of minute, unidentifiable structures embedded throughout their brain tissue, structures that appeared to be artificial in nature. Dr. Halloran presented his preliminary findings at a closed medical conference in March 1990. His research was immediately classified. Halloran himself was offered a position at a private research facility with ties to the Department of Defense. He declined. 3 weeks later, he was found, dead in his office from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. His research materials, computer files, and patient samples disappeared. A colleague who requested anonymity revealed that in the days before his death, Halloran had become increasingly paranoid, claiming he was being followed by people whose faces weren't quite right. The colleague also reported that Halloran had discovered something in his own brain scans, evidence that he himself had been compromised during his research. Throughout the 1990s, as internet communication became widespread, authorities found it increasingly difficult to contain information about these entities. Online forums became filled with personal accounts of encounters with wrong clowns, performers whose movements seemed mechanical, whose features changed when viewed from different angles, or who appeared in locations with no logical explanation. In response, a sophisticated disinformation campaign was launched. Popular culture was flooded with fictional clown horror. Documentaries about the psychology of clown fear proliferated. The strategy was simple but effective. Make the truth indistinguishable from fiction. Bury genuine accounts under an avalanche of manufactured content. Anyone sharing a real encounter would be dismissed as merely repeating tropes from horror movies or urban legends. A leaked memo from a private intelligence contractor dated 1998 outlined this approach. Information containment in the digital age requires not censorship but dilution. By saturating media channels with fictionalized versions of Entity Series K incidents, we create effective cognitive barriers to actual disclosure. Recommend immediate funding for multiple entertainment properties featuring antagonist figures matching target morphology. The most significant breach occurred in 2002 when researcher Daniel Morrison gained access to archives from Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official investigation into UFO phenomena. Among these materials, Morrison discovered a subclassification for encounters labeled biological entities, terrestrial extra-dimensional origin. These files contained hundreds of incident reports involving clown-like entities dating back to the 1940s. The reports described beings that could alter their physical form, but required certain geometric patterns, typically applied as makeup, to maintain human appearance. They were attracted to strong emotional outputs, particularly from children. And most disturbing, they appeared to extract something from their victims, not just physical tissue, but something the reports described as psycho-emotional energy, or consciousness substrate. Morrison compiled these findings and uploaded them to an anonymous server in December 2002. The information was online for less than 12 hours before the server was destroyed in what was reported as an electrical fire. Morrison himself disappeared 3 days later while traveling to meet with a journalist. His rental car was found abandoned at a rest stop in Nevada. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph showing what appeared to be a tall, emaciated figure with a white face standing at the edge of the parking lot. The figure's features were distorted in a way that suggested it was not wearing makeup, but was somehow inherently wrong. In 2008, a pattern of clown sightings emerged in rural communities across the Midwest. Witnesses described figures standing motionless in cornfields or at the edges of forests, watching homes where children lived. Unlike previous sightings, these entities made no attempt to interact or lure victims. They simply watched, often for hours, before disappearing when approached. Local authorities dismissed the reports as pranks, but leaked emails from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit referenced escalation of Entity K surveillance behaviors and warned of an imminent collection phase. The emails recommended increased monitoring of missing persons, reports in affected counties, and deployment of specialized containment teams disguised as ordinary law enforcement. By 2013, the strategy shifted from containment to misdirection. A coordinated campaign of creepy clown sightings was orchestrated across multiple countries. These incidents, involving people dressed as threatening clowns appearing in public places, generated widespread media coverage and public concern. But they served a specific purpose: to normalize such sightings and train the public to attribute them to human pranksters rather than something more sinister. A Department of Homeland Security document, obtained through a FOIA request but heavily redacted, outlined this strategy. Operation Carnival Mask will implement controlled exposure events across multiple jurisdictions, creating attribution pathways for spontaneous Entity K manifestations. Public and media response patterns will be monitored to assess effectiveness of cover story penetration. In 2016, the most extensive wave of clown sightings in history swept across North America and Europe. Thousands of reports flooded police departments and social media. The official narrative attributed this to mass hysteria fueled by media coverage and online rumors. Case closed. But internal communications between federal agencies told a different story. A classified briefing, leaked by a contractor in 2019, described the 2016 events as the largest coordinated manifestation of Entity K incursions since monitoring began. The document went on to state that dimensional permeability has increased beyond predicted parameters and that containment protocols are failing at an accelerating rate. Most concerning was the section titled Biological Integration Assessment, which noted tissue samples acquired from terminated entities show increasing adaptive capabilities. Entity K biomaterial now demonstrates 98.7% compatibility with human cellular structures, suggesting capability for complete molecular mimicry is imminent. Window for maintaining species distinction is closing. In 2020, during the global pandemic, something unexpected happened. As people isolated in their homes and public gatherings ceased, reports of Entity K manifestations dropped to near zero. A classified study conducted by DARPA researchers, portions of which were accidentally included in an unrelated FOIA release, theorized that these entities require regular exposure to human emotional output, particularly fear, wonder, and excitement, to maintain their presence in our reality. The report stated, Entity K manifestations appear contingent on human observational energies, particularly those generated by concentrated emotional states. The performance context isn't merely a cultural convenience, but a biological necessity for these beings. Without regular exposure to the specific neurological outputs generated by human audiences, they cannot maintain molecular cohesion in our dimensional plane. As public gatherings resumed in 2021, so did the sightings. But something had changed. The entities now appeared more stable, more capable of maintaining human appearance without the traditional geometric patterns of clown makeup. They had adapted, evolved. Witnesses described encounters with individuals who seemed human in all respects, except for subtle wrongness. Eyes slightly too large, smiles that extended too far, movements that seemed to include too many joints. The most disturbing development came in 2023, when pediatric neurologists across the country began documenting an unusual condition in children who had recently attended Carnival or Circus events. These children exhibited minute structures in their brain tissue similar to those discovered by Dr. Halloran decades earlier. But these structures were more advanced, more integrated with human neural pathways. The children themselves showed no obvious symptoms besides one consistent report. They all described dreams of smiling people coming to take them somewhere special. A classified CDC assessment, shared through secure channels with select research hospitals, designated this phenomenon neurological infiltration syndrome. The document advised physicians to report any cases to a special task force rather than documenting them in official medical records. Treatment protocols were outlined, though their effectiveness was described as limited once integration reaches stage 3. Today, as advanced imaging technology becomes more widespread, it's becoming increasingly difficult for authorities to contain the truth. Civilian-grade thermal cameras can detect the subtle temperature differences that distinguish these entities from humans. Spectral analysis applications on smartphones can identify the unique light absorption patterns in their pseudoskin. They walk among us, but they can now be seen by those who know what to look for. Which brings us to the most troubling question: what do they want? Why? This centuries-long infiltration? The answer may lie in a document leaked from a closed-door United Nations security briefing in 2024. It described these entities not as predators in the conventional sense, but as dimensional colonizers, beings that require human consciousness as a resource for their own reality. The document stated, Entity K manifestations represent the visible portion of a larger incursion process. These beings do not merely take individual humans, but are gradually altering the fundamental nature of human consciousness to make it more compatible with their dimensional requirements. Each interaction, each sighting, each moment of fear or wonder in their presence creates another point of access. The ultimate goal appears to be not consumption or replacement, but transformation of our reality into an extension of theirs. Consider how our cultural relationship with clowns has evolved over the past century, from beloved entertainers to objects of instinctive fear. This isn't merely changing fashion or cultural drift, it's recognition, a deepening awareness in our collective unconscious that something is wrong. The more these entities integrate with our reality, the more we instinctively sense the wrongness behind their painted smiles. You've likely encountered one without knowing it, perhaps at a childhood birthday party, a street performance, or a local festival. You may have felt that momentary unease, not just ordinary discomfort, but a deeper sense that something fundamental was incorrect about the figure before you. That wasn't merely psychological discomfort, it was recognition, warning. Your most primitive brain structures identifying something that doesn't belong in our reality. Think back. Remember that clown whose movements seemed just slightly wrong, whose eyes held your gaze too long, whose smile stretched just a fraction wider than human anatomy should allow? You weren't imagining it. You were seeing through the disguise. Since beginning this investigation 3 years ago, I've experienced escalating interference, equipment failures, missing recordings, data corruption. 2 months ago, I returned home to find my research materials rearranged, subtly but unmistakably. Last week, I began finding small origami figures throughout my home, crude paper constructions resembling clown faces in places I'm certain I didn't put them. Yesterday, I woke to find my bathroom mirror covered in geometric symbols drawn in what appeared to be red grease paint. When I tried to photograph them, my phone camera captured only a blank mirror. When I touched the symbols, they felt slick and cold, but left no residue on my fingers. They know I'm compiling this information. They know you're watching it. By sharing this knowledge, we've both become part of their awareness. I can't tell if that makes us targets or if it serves some larger purpose in their design. If you've watched this video to the end, you need to be vigilant. Pay attention to subtle wrongness in the people around you. Notice unnatural movements, expressions that don't quite match emotions, eyes that reflect light at unusual angles. Type, "I see them smiling" in the comments so others will know you've been informed. Share this video before it's removed. Download it while you can. And most importantly, if you see a clown, anywhere, do not maintain eye contact. Do not show strong emotion. Do not allow yourself to be separated from others. What they require is not your body, but your attention, your emotional response, your consciousness. They've been watching us from the edges of our reality for centuries, and they're still waiting for us to invite them in.